Welcome to this week's TikTok tutorial. So excited to see you here on Market Power. I guess it's not technically Market Power. On Management 1050. So excited to see people sending love in the comments. Thanks so much. You guys are great. I do miss you as well. I don't know how much you guys really miss me, given that we had an exam. It has been a full week since we've seen each other. You had the exam on Thursday, and now here we have back on lectures. We have a good question on stock market thriving on bad news. Is this audio coming through well? It feels like maybe it's a little crackly. I'm not sure. Summary on the stock market is that stock market is about expectations. It's about look at that. We've got students from last semester. It's about what people think is coming. It's not about what's happening today. So just because something happens today doesn't mean that people aren't thinking the future is going to be better. It would have been so great to have this class this semester in person, where we could have done more of these kind of question and answer things. Someone did, yes, so the audio is bad. Let me see if there's anything I can do about that. Let's see if this is, I don't know. Let me try unplugging and then plugging back in. Oh, I hope. Okay. So hopefully I have that back in now. Someone says much better before I had unplugged. Maybe they were just making the reference to the fact that I had stopped talking. That's why it's better. I'm seeing people saying it's better now. I don't know if they're referring to this because of the dang lag. We'll see. I feel like right now it's better. I'm not hearing the crackly noise that I was hearing earlier. And I don't know. Here I am just rambling, trying to wait for a class to start, getting some thumbs up. Why not start? There we go. I don't even know if you guys can tell who this is. Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. Let's do this. Today we're talking about inequality. Big topic in the news, especially in the year of a presidential election. Talking about inequality is going to be big. That was actually some of the main platforms of people like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. Neither of them are running for president right now, but that was really what they were running on, was inequality. Biden is running on not being Trump and being Obama's vice president. So here we are. I don't know really what Biden's main thing is, but inequality is still important to his platform as well. So we are going to have this lecture on inequality, and we want to understand what inequality is. Now let me show you this picture. This is a classic picture of inequality. This is in Brazil. I can't tell you which city in Brazil. It's probably Rio or Sao Paulo. But here you have this just resort hotel area. I mean, you've got these balconies are sweet, and it looks like they each have their own pool. I'm not sure. Like, we've got a couple of them with their own pool. So you have this tiered balcony, just really cool looking thing. And then, you've got the sports courts and maybe some more pool back here. And then you just have favelas right next to it. You just have this stark line separating the poor from the rich. It's just so stark. And that's one of the first things you notice when you go to Haiti, is just you land there and you just see the slums up against the mountains, and you just see the inequality right there. I mean, these are tin roof houses. These things are going to fall at any second. Any type of natural disaster that comes through there is going to wipe them out. There's lots of fear in these countries with coronavirus, when you're looking at everybody crowded together in these kind of living situations where social distancing is not possible, and the fear that we haven't even really seen what's going to happen in these countries when coronavirus actually hits them. And that makes it so coronavirus actually hits people differently. This is a form of inequality, right? The rich are able to separate themselves, keep themselves in locations where they're not going to be able to infect each other, and the poor can't hide. So you have the inequality is just, it's stark, and it exists throughout the world. This, I wish, I actually do not have a copy of this book. You can hopefully see how thick it is from that spine. I believe this thing is like 700 pages. It's called Capital in the 21st Century. It was a huge book back in 2014, 2015-ish. I can't remember. I think it was released at the beginning of 2015. This is 700 pages of economic statistics. Okay, so this is just going through and looking at inequality over time, going through the 20th century. I think maybe going back to the 19th century. I can't remember how far back this thing goes, but it's just, here's inequality, here's how much wealth people have had, blah, blah. You know, the kind of riveting, just page-turning statistics that I know you all love. This book, when it was released, spent 3 weeks as the #1 bestseller on the New York Times. This thing was huge. This thing, it was all people were talking about for weeks. This has a huge effect on a lot of the campaigns that came out after, or that have come on since. You know, some of the economists associated with this book have worked with Elizabeth Warren. I don't know if any have worked with Bernie, but this was a hugely influential book. And just to, what's crazy about it is just 700 pages of economic statistics, #1 New York Times bestseller. Just crazy. This is how popular and a topic inequality is. Now, I remember at the time, so many people were discussing this book, and then somebody came out with these statistics, and it was one, let's see, they were looking at the Kindle version, because on the Kindle, you can actually track how far people have read onto it, and it was the book that the most people had read, but hadn't made it past, like, page 20 or something. That was a lovely statistic. And then finally, there's Occupy Wall Street. This is the point where I usually ask this question that makes me feel super old, and it is, how many of you know what Occupy Wall Street is? And some of you on this chat are going to be like, oh yeah, I know what it is. Yeah, when I ask this question, there's like 2 people in a class of 200 who will raise their hands and say, I know what Occupy Wall Street is, which is crazy to me because this was only something that happened back in 2011, 2012, and was huge. This was this big movement. This is the foundation of so many politics today. Like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she is her political career. The seeds of it start at this protest, and what happens is there's this. It's just this movement. All these people go out to this park and they just start camping out, protesting inequality right on Wall Street. And I remember when I was getting ready to move to Connecticut, I flew out there. So this was about March 2012. I went to Connecticut, and the main green, kind of the big green space out in the middle of the city, just covered in tents from people joining this Occupy Wall Street movement as part of the just kind of like a satellite part of Occupy Wall Street. This is where the phrase 1%, when you hear people saying we are the 1%, or when you hear people talking about like the 1% this, 1% that, so much of that discussion started here in Occupy Wall Street. And so to hear people say to hear students say they don't know what it is, I mean, it makes sense. This is 8 years ago, right? So a lot of students, they're 10 years old at the time or something. Like, of course, they're not going to really know much about what was going on. But in terms of social movements that we're still hearing the echoes of, this is actually a pretty big one. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see a YouTube link. Normally, I would play this in class, but for the sake of my YouTube videos, I'm sorry, I'm not going to play it on here, but it is a clip from The Daily Show. It is so funny. You need to go watch that after you watch this lecture. It's about Occupy Wall Street. It is great. Well, so why do we care about inequality? Let's think about this. Back day one of this class, Angerman and Sokoloff were thinking about countries prosper when their institutions are inclusive, when everyone has opportunity, when they can participate in the economy, right? This has been like a really foundational part of thinking about American history, about thinking about what we've talked about in this class. Angerman and Sokoloff argued that this distinction between inclusive and exclusive institutions, whether you get one or the other, that comes from your level of inequality, right? So if you have high inequality, that means you have a few individuals who have power to create exclusive institutions that retain their wealth and status. Now, the US, they argue, created inclusive institutions because it started with low inequality. We had these, you were on small farms, you had small family farms. People were there. Everyone was making about the same money. Here they are creating inclusive institutions, but in those places like South America, where you had large inequality, high inequality, you're making exclusive institutions. But what about today? What does inequality look like today? Are we on this path towards more have institutions going on? We have, I think the UPS guy might be coming up. Everybody say hi to Mr. Ups. So the big questions, or the value proposition of today's lecture, is to say, what is inequality? Like, when people are talking about inequality, what do they mean? How do we measure it? And how has it changed over time? We want to look at these trends, and then we want to ask, what has caused inequality? When we're talking about, we need to have a model of where inequality is coming from. We want to understand, like, what are some of the models that people say explain inequality today. So before we get in, let's get into this thought experiment. And this is a philosopher, I believe John Rawls was at Harvard. So this is a philosopher from Harvard who just had this idea that I want to play with here. He came up with this thought experiment to answer this question on, like, how should society be structured? And he said, like, let's imagine that before the world was created, you existed. We all existed. Like, we all existed before this world existed. And in that time, before we existed, there's this council that comes together to discuss this world that they will be creating. And there's a veil, he says. He calls it the veil of ignorance. You don't know who you're going to be when you get to Earth. That means you don't know what your sex is going to be, what your race is going to be, your nationality, nothing. You don't know who you're going to be when you actually get to Earth. It's called the veil of ignorance. You're here. There's this world on the other side. You don't know what's going to be when you get there. In this council, when people are discussing what kind of rules they want to create for society, what is the structure of this world going to be like? What are the rules these people would create? What are the rules you would create if you're in that situation? Now, the conclusion from this is pretty self-evident. I don't know, like, how, kind of interesting to think about this, but the thing that you would naturally come up with is, well, if I don't know who I'm going to be when I get to Earth, what would I want the rules to be like? Well, I don't know if I'm going to be a man or a woman. Do I really want to limit opportunities for men or women when I get to Earth? Probably not. So I'm going to probably create pretty equal opportunities for men and women. I don't know if I'm going to be black or white or Asian, Hispanic. I don't know what my race is going to be. So I should probably make sure that my rules are fair to people regardless of their nationality, of their race, right? Like, if that was the case, you would want to make rules that were fair for everyone. Now, you might be willing to tolerate some risk. Let's say we told you there's only a 10% chance that you're going to be something, there's a 10% chance you're going to be left-handed. You might create some sort of rules that say, well, if I'm left-handed, like we're willing to discriminate against left-handed people because there's a small chance that I'll actually be left-handed. So I'm willing to take them down a bit so that way I can benefit a little bit. You might be willing to do that, but you're probably not going to allow too big of a spread because you don't want to have this situation where you're totally disadvantaged. So this was this thought experiment that I think is actually pretty useful because it puts you in this mindset of, yeah, this is that what are the ideal rules for society? Well, the ideal rules are going to be this place where I don't know who I'm going to be, and I want to make sure that I'm treated fairly as a result. So you're going to make sure that you design rules and a system that isn't discriminatory based on things that are outside of your control. You might still say, well, it's not that everyone ends up the exact same. They don't have the same outcomes. So you might want people who work hard get rewarded for that hard work. They can keep some of that. And people who decide that they just want to play Fortnite all day, they're going to not be able to get the same opportunity or the same outcomes as people who decide that they're going to make huge contributions all day, right? Like you might be willing to change rules that way, but on a lot of things you would be willing to give and make sure we're going to have equal opportunity. So broadly conceived, so the way you can think about that thought experiment is how much inequality would we choose to have in society? And if we were to set things up that way, we would likely choose a society with very little inequality. But inequality, broadly conceived, is just going to be differences in economic well-being across individuals. So some people like to divide this into two categories, like inequality in opportunities, inequality in outcomes. We've talked a lot about inequality of opportunity. These are things like exclusive institutions. We talked about this in slavery, banking, cartels, women's rights, civil rights movement. A lot of that was just inequality and opportunity. People did not have the same opportunities as others in society. Today, we're going to focus mostly on inequality in outcomes. Now, of course, inequality and opportunity is going to play into this, but we're going to focus a lot on inequality and outcomes since that is what we typically measure and that is what we discuss a lot in public policy. So how do we measure income? It is surprisingly hard to measure income in any year and especially throughout history. How do you handle young workers? How do you handle married couples? Do I have the right slide here? Okay, yes. And you want to measure inequality as well, obviously, but to measure inequality, you need to measure income. It is really hard. There's lots of different types of income. You have income from the stock market. You have income from, let's say there's a big upswing in the stock market followed by a downswing. Like, what is your income? At what point? It's just like so hard to measure those kind of things. Do you measure it based on paper gains, based on realized gains? Is income something at the household level where you think a married couple and think how much income does one spouse have, how much does the other? Or is it at the individual level where you just look at each individual and say how much income do they get? It turns like, do you count young workers? Like right now, I'm sure many of you are working, well, to the extent that you can work in this environment. But, how much do we count your income when you're not making that much a year versus, but you are studying and you're investing in your future? And how much do we, what point do we say, oh, you're actually making an income that's worth counting? So many of these things that are hard to say. By the way, how much do you have to make right now to be in the top 1%? Good question, right? Let me bring this nice little tool up. It's going to take a second. Okay, now I've got to make sure that you guys can actually see this. Boom. Oh, and then I have to get rid of my lovely face. Okay, there we go. What percent are you? This is dated, so this is from 2016. So sorry for the dated reference here, but this is a calculator from the Wall Street Journal, and you can compare your personal income with other earners to figure out where in the distribution you are. So when we talk about the 1%, how much do you have to make to end up in the 1%? Well, let's say that, I don't know. Let's say, like, let's just put $1 million. Obviously, $1 million is going to put you in the 1%, right? If that's your annual income. But what does it take to get us out of the 1%? So let's knock it down to $100,000. 8%er. Okay? 8%er. I don't even know if this counts like total compensation. Is this counting benefits and retirement contributions? Health benefits and stuff? I don't know. That's a good question. What does this say? It doesn't say. There you go. Well, let's say 200,000. 200,000 puts us in the 2%. 300,000, still in the 2%. $400,000, you are a 1%er for sure. Let's get down to 350. 350, 1%er. Let's get down to 325. 1%er. Look at that. We're getting there. 310. What if we just go 301? Okay, you gotta have I know you guys are having fun. 307, 307, 306. Can I get 306? There we go. 305, 305. 306 looks like a decent cutoff on what it takes to be a 1%er. 306,000, is that household or individual? That's also a good question. I don't know if this is... Look at this. Oh, look at this. This only counts people 16 and older, right? Personal income greater than $0, right? So this includes people, this includes a 17-year-old working at a fast food restaurant, right? Like that's included in here, and that's going to bump up who's in the 1%, right? Generations don't care. Anyway, don't really want to go too in depth on this. $306,000. Now you say, wow, $306,000 is a lot of money. It is. It is. You can, like, I'm making these facial expressions and you can't even see me. There we go. So, $300,000 is a lot. But think about, like, who is included in $300,000. Let's see. Oh, I forgot to make my summer sales joke. Yes, I was going to make a joke about, like, let's say you're some summer salesperson, and I was going to plug that number in. Sorry for missing that. So let's think about this. Like, if you own a business, if you, like, imagine you are a dentist, like a dentist who probably does fine, but has like big revenue during the year, but also has lots of costs. All those kind of things, like lots of dentists and doctors are going to be put into the 1%. Lots of just local business owners, restaurant owners are going to be in the 1%, I imagine. You're going to have all these people. Like, when a lot of people, when they say the 1%, this is the point I'm trying to clarify. When a lot of people say the 1%, on their mind, I think, is Bill Gates. They're thinking Mark Zuckerberg. Those people are totally in the 1%, but they're not like the 1%. They're like the 0.00001%. They are in the 1% of the 1% of the 1% type thing, right? Like, they are way up there. People are like, yeah, just tax them and we could solve all these problems. But when we realize the 1% goes all the way down to, just people who are in your community running local businesses, suddenly it's like, oh, that's who we want to tax to try and support all these policies. So the 1%, who is the 1%, is not as clear of a question as you might think. So there's all these problems. I'm trying to think if where's my... Oh, okay, no, it's later on. Sorry, I had this really important point that I was making here, and I thought I had it right here. But let's think about another thing about inequality. Lots of these inequality problems they're all pre-taxes. Okay, oh, now I'm seeing. So most measures of inequality do not account for taxes or welfare transfers. So let's think about this. If you made $1 million and then you keep less than $600,000, right? So you get $400,000 taxed away. The inequality measure will count your income as $1 million. It's not going to count the fact that $400,000 was taken away. And then if you make $20,000 a year, and on top, so $20,000, you're not, you're towards the bottom of the income ladder, but you get $7,000 in tax credits because you have some kids, you have some things where they send money to you, and then like maybe you get $4,000 a year in welfare benefits. Maybe you're on WIC or some of these programs where you're getting money. So that's going to add another $11,000. So you go from $20,000 to $31,000. Your income is only going to be counted as $20,000. So the high earners, their income is going to be counted as too high, and the low earners are going to be counted as too low. And maybe you say this is trivial. Maybe you should say, oh, who cares if a millionaire is only being counted as $600,000? That's still a ton of money, especially compared to somebody making $20,000 versus $31,000. That's just like no one even notices that difference when you're comparing to the $1,600,000 range. But there's a really, really important point in here. This means that every poverty reduction policy that we have won't affect the measures of inequality or poverty, right? Let's say we literally take away $500,000 from a millionaire and give it to this poor person making $20,000. So now the poor person with the $20,000 and the $500,000 is making $520,000, and the millionaire only has $500,000. Well, we're going to say that guy who got that money transferred to him still only made $20,000, and the millionaire still has $1 million. So like, we've literally just taken money and given to the other person, but forgotten that happened when we calculate inequality. So that would have zero effect on inequality. This is really bad for a lot of measures of inequality because it doesn't actually solve the problem. It doesn't actually, we are solving the problem, but we're not measuring that we're solving the problem. And so we're going to understate a lot of good. We're going to say like, oh yeah, let's keep doing these policies. And those policies don't actually affect the things that we're measuring. That we should really be concerned about that. Okay, so how do we measure inequality and how has it changed over time? I'm just going to focus on one definition of inequality. I call it the share at the top. I don't think it has a technical name. But this is like the most commonly cited measure in the news today. And that's the share of income at the top of the distribution. Imagine we have 100 people. I've put them right here. We're going to order them from top to bottom in terms of like the poorest person is going to be in that top left-hand corner. You're going to get richer as you go along. It doesn't actually matter on this thing, but like the richest people are down at the bottom. Okay, that's the point that matters. To calculate their share of income received by the top 1%, what we do is we take all of this income, we add it up. So we take how much the first person made, plus second person, plus third person, plus fourth, right? We go all the way through, and then we say, we're going to take this person's income, and we're going to divide it by the sum of all income, okay? Let's get out the whiteboard. I know, this is a moment you have all been waiting for. When is the whiteboard coming out? I didn't think I was going to do it, but I've been forced to. So we're going to take, if we have 100 people, we're going to create a fraction. We're going to do, your income is just going to be, let's do P, because, yeah, why not? Person 1 plus person 2 plus all the way up to person 100 in this case, right? We have 100 people here. This is adding up everybody's income, putting that in the denominator for the 1%, which in this case, there are 100 people. So there's only one person in the 1%. We're just going to put person 100 in the top, okay? Boop. Person 100 over, everybody down at the bottom. Okay? Total point. Here's a question for you. If there is perfect equality, everybody has the same income, what is this fraction going to equal? Think about that. Put it in the chat. Let me know. I'll get back to that in just a second, but of course I have to wait for this fun 12-second delay. Let me just point out that it doesn't have to just be top 1%. It could be 10%, right? We could say, what share of income does the top 10% hold? And then we would take that and say, we would say something about society by saying, how much does the 10% hold? How much does the 1% hold? And we can look at how this goes up and up. Okay, answers are starting to come in. So far, one answer. Let me toast to you. Waiting a second. So far, only one answer. Hopefully more come in. But we're getting people agreeing that that's the right answer. Yes, if everybody has the same exact income, this is going to be 1 over 100 or 0.01. Right? So that's what makes this a really nice, intuitive measure. This is why people like this, because what you can say is, well, the closer this is to 1%, the fairer the society is. If this is 20%, that means that of all the income, I mean, it's just self-explanatory, right? The top person has 20% of the total income. That is just, that seems like it's pretty unfair. But that's just, it's hard to rate fairness, right? But the closer that number is to 1%, the closer we are to a fair society. If they have 9%, if they have 15%, we're farther away, right? 9% is worse than 1%. 15% is worse than both of those, right? Like that's, if it's 100%, that means literally one person has all of the income in this entire society. So that's why people like this measure, because it's pretty intuitive. It's pretty easy. Well, is it easy to measure? That's great. Quite good question. So here's the slide saying basically what I just said. It's an intuitive interpretation of this measure. That's why we like it. Here's an example. Everyone makes $50,000, population of 100 people. That gives you $5 million. The top person makes $50,000 because everybody makes the same amount, so it doesn't matter who the top person is. That person has 1% of all income, so the top 1% of the economy earns 1% of all income. That's a pretty easy, intuitive explanation of what's going on here, right? Well, what are the weaknesses of this? Oh, we're not going to get the weaknesses. We're going to calculate this. We're going to calculate it in a way that is fun. Here we are at the obligatory Marvel reference. I feel like I haven't done as many Marvel references this year, probably because it has been so long since a Marvel movie has come out. It is now a year since Endgame came out. I guess it's not quite a year. Next week will be a year. But this is actually a fun time because I did a video when Endgame came out where I watched it, 4 or 5 times in 24 hours on opening weekend. Diminishing Returns kicked in pretty hard. Recommend that one. It's one of my favorite ones, though I didn't do a very good job editing that video, I think. That's unfortunate. I've learned a lot in a year. Okay, so we're going to look at this. The nice thing about this is you can calculate this with anything. You can do it with movies. You can do it with anything you want. So we're going to do it with movies. Man, again, stupid lag and online courses. We're going to look at domestic box office revenues for all wide releases from 1995 to 2018. And man, this is a good time to bring in the watch party submission. Which movie were you most looking forward to this year that has been delayed? There's been a lot of them. I mean, Trolls came out over the weekend, and you got to watch that. But, there's things like Black Widow, Soul. What are some of the other ones that have been delayed? I can't even remember off the top of my head. But let me know. Send me a picture of you watching this. I have picked out some of the prizes, by the way. I'm going to have the drawing. When am I going to have the drawing? I think so. You have today and you have Thursday submit, and I'll probably announce the winners in a week from today. So I'll do that raffle, and I've got some shirts, I've got a sticker, I've got a book. It's gonna be good stuff, guys. I'm kind of excited about the shirts. So make sure you send me that picture. Oh, do I have this muted? I don't. I don't want you guys like interrupting this. All right. So we're gonna look at. We can do this with movies. We're gonna do this with the box office. And usually I ask you, oh, like what were the top movies in 2017, 2007, 1996? That is a fun game because people usually can't remember them. But here we go. 2017, the biggest movies were Black Panther, Avengers Infinity War, and Incredibles 2. Yes, you do. Just send me the submissions through the Canvas inbox would be the best. I haven't even seen Quiet Place 1, so I wasn't too bummed out when I missed Quiet Place 2. Sorry, guys. What was it in 2007? Top movies were Spider-Man 3, Shrek the Third, and the first Transformers. Shrek, there's supposed to be fifth Shrek movie in the works. I don't know, is that still in the works? I think it is. I heard Mr. Beast is going to be a voice for one of the characters. And then 1997, stretching way back to possibly before some of you were even born, top movies were Titanic, Men in Black, and Jurassic Park: The Lost World. Now, something I like to point out on these top movies, even going back to 1997, even 1997, the top movies in all of these years, franchises, right? Black Panther, Avengers Infinity War, part of the same franchise. Incredibles 2, part of the Incredibles franchise, right? This is a sequel. Spider-Man 3, that is the third movie. Shrek the Third, right? Transformers, that was the first one in the in the Transformers franchise, and we had way too many after that, right? Titanic, not a franchise, and it was the number one grossing movie for a really, really long time. Men in Black, not a franchise at this point, but then turns into a franchise. Jurassic Park: The Lost World, second movie in a franchise that again also has gone on. And some of these movies, we just had a Men in Black movie come out last year. We have a new Jurassic Park movie coming out in a year or two, right? This is something that will help us understand inequality if you realize that, wow, a lot of these top performing movies are movies from franchises. So this is the share at the top. Back in 1995, the top 10%, I'm going with 10% because if you go back and look at this, there's only 150 to 180 movies per year. So 1% would just be the number one movie in each year, right? The number 1 to 2 movie. So I'm going to do 10%. So that way, in 1996, we're looking at 15 movies. And in 2007, we're looking at 18 or 19 movies. I can't remember. But we're going to have our sample look like that. So the top 15 movies, I already forgot. Yeah, in 1995-96, the top 15 movies accounted for about 40% of all box office revenues, right? And that has been increasing up until 2016, 2017. It was about 60%, right? So we have seen growing inequality in box office revenues. Do I have the? Oh, I don't have. I've got the legend for that, but I'm sure I come up to it later on. But so when we talk about increasing inequality, this. Oh, crumb! Did I just have something happen to this live stream? Oh yeah. Did I? Okay. I had this like weird pop up come up, and I was like, junk. Now looking back, and I see the comment on Tenet, and yes, I want to see Tenet more than anything. Has it been delayed yet? Christopher Nolan, man. That is. Well, let's see. Oh yeah, so Tenet has not officially been delayed yet. I don't think so. They're kind of holding out. You guys realize that like there are no movies coming out this year, so like Sonic the Hedgehog is gonna win Best Picture. That's very crazy. Okay. Oh, did it not? Oh, I can't hear the. Can you hear the beeps? I thought I. Let's see. I'm muting it. Thank you. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that beeps were coming through. I can't hear them, but you can. There you go. Okay. So look at increasing inequality. We talk about increasing inequality and we talk about what's going on in the world and all these people that are doing unfair things. Like, one of the reasons why I like the movie revenue data is that like so many of the problems associated with inequality just don't exist in the movie revenue data. You don't have people trying to hide income. You don't have so many things, right? This isn't people trying to hose the poor, all this kind of stuff. And here you have this beautiful demonstration of increasing inequality over the past 30 years, 25 years in movie revenues. This is crazy. This is crazy to me, right? This is such an interesting trend. So inequality has been increasing in the share of the top 1%, 10% of movies since 1995. Just nuts for me, okay? What are some of the weaknesses with the top 1%? And this is, well, okay, to get at this, think about survey. Like, a lot of times when we're doing these kind of surveys, we're calling people up, we're saying, hey, tell us about your income, tell us about your employment status, tell us about all these things, right? I don't know about you, but it is pretty hard to get a hold of Bill Gates for me. Last time I called him, he said he was busy, didn't want to hang out with me over the weekend. That was unfortunate, right? So it's not like somebody calling around and asking for income statistics is really going to be able to call up Bill Gates and say, hey, okay, I'm seeing still notifications. You know what I can do? I'll try another tack. Let's try that. That should definitely get rid of them. Sorry about that. So it's not like we can get a hold of the 1% that easily. It's going to be really hard to get that data if we're just calling people up and asking them for it. So what do we do to get around this? We use tax data. People are filling out, they have to fill out their tax returns. We look at it, we say, okay, how much did Bill Gates put down for his taxes this year? That's going to give us an idea of how much income he has. Still not perfect because there's just so many things that go on with this. But let me give you a really interesting problem with using tax data, especially over time. How things have changed in the past 50 or 60 years. And it has to do with like how households are together, okay? So let's say that there are 1,000 people in this society. And we're going to make this like just super basic, so they're all going to earn $1, okay? No other income, just $1 each. And they all get married, okay? So when they all file taxes, there are 500 tax filings because they're all married, right? 100 divided by 2, boom, they're all together. 500 households filing taxes. In the top 1%, let's see, top 10%, we're going to go on this one. There's going to be 50 units, tax units, households, right at the top. And each one of those is going to have $2 because they have 2 people in them. But, what we're going to find is that the top 50 you earn $100, which is 10% of total income because there's $1,000 in the entire society. And then we're going to have that the top 10% has 10% of all the income, right? Great. Perfect equality, which is what we designed, right? $1 per person, perfect equality, okay? Now, suppose that 500 people in this group decide to not get married. So we originally had 1,000, everybody gets married. Now half of them are going to say, you know what, we don't want to get married. We're just going to be single. Maybe it's not even that they don't want to get married. Maybe they all cohabitate, right? They could still be in the same structure. Let's actually leave it at that. They're just not married. They even are living together. They're just not married. And so because they're not married, they don't file their taxes together. They file separate taxes. Well, now there are 250 married households and then 500 people who aren't married. So that the total number of tax filings is going to be 750. Well, now we're going to get 10% of that, we need 75 units. So the top 75, which is going to all be married households, right? Because that's going to be the ones that had they'll have 2 filings in there. Those 75 have $150 in income because there's $2 per household. And so now that top 75 so the top 10% accounts for 15% of the income. There's no change in actual inequality. Okay, everybody's making the same money as before, but we've changed the way people file taxes because of the way that they've changed their marital status, and that changes the way we measure inequality. This is not a hypothetical situation. We've obviously seen changes in marriage patterns over time, and so this is affecting the way that we measure inequality over time. And furthermore, a lot of that change happens at the bottom of the income distribution. It doesn't matter where it happens, right? Like you can have perfect equality, and you can still get more inequality, measured inequality, by changing how people are married. But if most of that marriage happens, that those changes in marriage happen at the bottom of the income distribution, which is the case, now all of a sudden we're seeing these just like wild things that could happen. So we have to take into account these changes in household status. We have to take changes in, there's just so many things. How, like the incentives that people have for how they file their taxes, lots of different things come into effect when you want to measure inequality over time. You have to take into account the changes that happen over time. So calculating the share at the top is difficult, but economists have still tried to estimate it. And the most widely circulated numbers come from a group of 3 French economists called Piketty, Saez, and Zucman. Piketty is the one who wrote the Capital in the 21st Century, that best-selling book I mentioned at the beginning. There's another series from Auten and Splinter. I'm not sure if it's Auten or Auten, but this is another set of estimates that try to get at inequality over time in the United States. We're going to go over both of these. I'm going to show you the Piketty numbers. I'm just going to call them the Piketty numbers. Sometimes they're called PSZ. I'm going to show you that one because that's the most widely cited one. And then I'm going to compare it to the Auten and Splinter one. So that way you see both of them. So this is the Piketty numbers. This is the top 10% of national incomes. Okay, so we're not even at the 1% here. They calculate, back in the 1915 all the way through 1942, the top 10% had about 45%. It doesn't matter if it's pre-tax or post-tax. Pretty similar. They had about 45% of national income. Sharp decline through World War II, and then you have a decline going all the way to the 70s, whereby the lowest point is about mid 70s. You're seeing that they have 35% of income pre-tax. Post-tax, 30%. Okay, they're taking into account that people are having money taken away, other people are having money given to them. And then since mid-70s, really since the beginning of the 80s, we've seen this steep increase where they say today inequality pre-tax is at its highest it has been since the early 20th century. And even post-tax, we're seeing pretty high inequality numbers. Okay, when people talk about trends in inequality, when they talk about inequality has increased, the share of income going to the top 1% has increased, they are talking about this data. I think at the next one, here's the 1%. They are talking about this time series right here. This is the exact one that you should know when people are talking about what's going on out there. This is for the 1%. You're seeing pretty similar trends. High inequality at the beginning of the 20th century, a decline, and then an increase since the 80s. This one you see a little bit more of an increase where even post-tax you're seeing pretty comparable numbers to the beginning. The idea from behind these is these economists argue that inequality today is as high as it has ever been, or pretty close to the peak. What's causing this? They think that a lot of this is caused by changes in taxes, that we aren't taxing the rich enough, that, that's their main argument is taxes. Let's check over here and the things. What is prosperity increases, inequality also increases? That's a good question. Do I go into that in this lecture? I don't think you can have inequality increase and still everyone be better off, right? But let's get into that in a little bit. Econ 3600, is it full? It is not. There is still space. There are 14 seats left, I believe, in that class. Okay, here's the comparison. This data only starts at 1960. Okay, so this is starting about halfway through the previous graph. It does not go all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century. The blue lines on top give you the same data that I just showed you, the Piketty, Saez, Zucman. I'm I mean, you guys can see those graphs pretty well. Yeah. The one below it is the Auten and Splinter. On the left-hand side, you're seeing, so both of these are 1%. The left-hand side is pre-tax. The right-hand side is post-tax. Pre-tax, Auten and Splinter are finding that, yes, inequality has increased, not nearly as much as Piketty and his co-authors declare. They're seeing a pretty big difference in the change of inequality between those two. But then when you look at after-tax income, if you look at the Auden and Splinter data, there's basically no change since 1960. Yes, there's like some fluctuations, but they're arguing with the redistribution we have, with taxes on the rich, with welfare for the poor, we're seeing effectively no change in after-tax income since 1960, that we don't have unprecedented inequality today. So, which one do we believe? I personally believe the Auten and Splinter numbers much more than the Piketty, Saez, and Zucman. So I believe the red numbers more than I believe the blue numbers. They have a paper that they released in December 2019, so just 4 months ago. If you look for these guys, Auten and Splinter, they'll tell you, they go through and give a very detailed breakdown of how they're adjusting for all these things. Like Piketty, Saez, Zucman, they do not take into account changes in household composition, like marriage rates, all those kind of things. So they're naturally going to calculate a higher inequality rate because they don't take that into account. They're not looking at how the tax reform in 1986, 85 affected how people file their taxes. And that ends up being really important, right? So Auden and Splinter go through and they give you exactly how they calculate their numbers. They show you how you can get the same numbers as Piketty, Saez, and Zucman by changing how you calculate it. And so it's a very transparent paper, and it just has, it's the way that we should be doing this kind of research. And so their numbers, I believe, are much stronger than the Piketty, Saez, Zucman data. So when people say income inequality has increased, they're looking at the Piketty data. A response would be, well, looking at the post-tax income data by Auten and Splinter, you actually have not seen a huge increase. Now, just because you haven't seen a big increase doesn't mean that this is not too high already, right? So at the end, it looks like it's at like 9%, I believe. Not the top 1% having 9% of after-tax income could still be too high of inequality. Okay, I'm not saying it's not too high. What I'm saying is that the trends do not look like they do in the way Piketty reports them, and it's not as high as Piketty says. It could still be high, okay? I'm not denying that there could be high inequality. I'm saying it's not as high as some economists believe. That's a whole, there's just like, if you're on economics Twitter, there's just this huge debate in there. I know you're like, why in the world would I be on econ Twitter? Where do you find these research papers? Good question. How do I find them for the first time? I just see other economists talking about them on econ Twitter, on blogs. Marginal Revolution is a big blog that I follow. But it doesn't have to just be that. Like, part of it is just, if you're wondering where do I find these, if you just Google their names, you'll find it. Or if you go to scholar.google.com, type in a subject that you're interested in, you can find papers on that topic. Okay. All right, what about inequality versus mobility? Inequality is a really static measure, right? It tells you what happens today, but what about over time? Like, we want to know if the rich are getting richer and if the poor are moving up, or if the poor are getting poorer, staying. What's going on with people in these situations? And this is where we talk about mobility. And a lot of times we'll talk about intergenerational mobility. That is, we talked about this in the migration lecture. Remember, we talked about, you have an immigrant and then you have their children, and you say, are those children doing as well or better than their parents? One way you might want to question this is, how close is your income related to your parents' income? How much of your income should be determined by the children's income? What is the probability that you make more money than your parents is another way to phrase this. I'm going to show you some numbers, but I want you to, man, this is, I know I just sound like a broken record talking about the limitations, but this is one of my favorite discussions. Here you go. Let me pose this question. Should your income depend on your parents' income? That is, if your parents were poor, does that mean that you should be poor? And if your parents are rich, does that mean that you should be rich, right? Like, how much should your income be tied to your parents' income? Let me know in the chat. I'd love to see your responses to that. We're going to talk about that later, but let me show you these numbers. So these are mobility numbers. This is the percent of children earning more than their parents based on the year that they were born. Okay, so in 1940, children born in 1940 grew up, and over 90% of them made more than their parents. That percent was decreasing over time. Children born in 1960, 60% of them made more than their parents, right? So you're seeing this big decline up until, let's see, children born in 1980 only had a 50% chance of making more than their parents. Okay, these numbers are concerning, right? Like, a lot of people are concerned about this, that children are not growing up to make as much as their parents, or there's not a high chance that they're going to make as much as their parents. This is across the whole distribution. So where were your parents and where are you? So over here on the left, this says you're the very poorest, right? You're down at the bottom 1%. 99% of people make more than you. Oh, no. This is the top 1%. What is it? Let's see. Oh, yeah, no. This is right. Okay, these are the poorest people over on the left. This is the percent of children earning more. So if you were born in 1940 to the poorest parents, you have a really strong chance of making more than your parents. Then, if you go and look at the top 1%, the idea is it's really hard to make more money than your parents. If your dad's Bill Gates, you're gonna have a hard time making more money than him, right? So it doesn't matter when you were born, you're not gonna make more than them. What this is showing is that across the entire distribution, it's not just like some people are making more, some people aren't. This is basically everybody is making like, you have a decrease in the chance that you're going to make more than your parents depending on the year you're born. The more recently you've been born, less likely you are to make more than your parents. This is called the Gatsby Curve, named after the Great Gatsby. This gives you the level of inequality on the x-axis, and then mobility on the y-axis. And what this is saying is the more inequality you have, the less mobility you have. This measure of mobility, the higher it is, the less mobility it is. So there seems to be a relationship between inequality and mobility. People are worried about that. Okay, let me look at these answers. I'm seeing a lot of people saying your income should not be connected to your parents' income, okay? Let's see, any other, to the point, I think there are restrictions on how they are raised up, but I feel like we're responsible for our own income in the end. Okay, so most people responding are saying, yeah, there shouldn't be a tight connection, right? And this is what this is saying, is that there should be, if we believe in lots of mobility, it shouldn't be that connected to your parents. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. One question is, how focused should we be on income inequality? Like, maybe we should be focused on consumption, where Jeff Bezos, there's this famous video in 1999, he was worth billions at the time, and he drove this just crap Honda car. Like, you can go find it on YouTube. It's just this garbage car. He's a billionaire, and he's just driving the same car that, like, a teenager at the time was driving, okay? You know, even though he has all that money, he's still consuming the same as everybody else, right? Like, maybe that's what we should be concerned about. There are other forms of inequality. You could have wealth inequality. Income is what's coming in, wealth is what you have. There's health inequality, right? Like, we're talking about coronavirus. We brought that up at the beginning. Like, rich people are going to be more able to affect what happens with coronavirus than poor people. Like they could be more affected, so we might care about health, education, right? There are going to be rich people who have access to education, poor people don't. I keep saying rich and poor. I mean, that's the cut of it, right? Sorry, I've basically gotten to what I've said. Income affects all of these things. It affects wealth, health, education. It affects your political power. So even though we might be more concerned about other forms of inequality, income inequality does affect all of those. So something we should still be concerned about. Someone asked if these are calculated with inflation. Yes, they are calculated with inflation. And we have other people. It seems like this chat always turns into a summer sales pitch, which tells you how well that summer sales job is going to go. There you go. But remember, we had this paradox of inequality. We talked about it with patents. Inequality is an incentive to innovate. We want to give people a reward. Like, hey, if you do something that changes society, we want to have some sort of incentive. We want people to be rewarded and have this desire to put in the effort it takes to change society. And also, you look over at like China and how they created equality, right? Like they got rid of the wealthy. They tried to make everybody as equal as possible. Man, that was a disaster, right? So like there's some balance in inequality that we need. And this gets to like there's got to be some optimal level of mobility, right? So if I asked you, should your wealth be connected to your parents' wealth? And most of you said, no, it shouldn't. But now let's flip it. Your kids, like if you make more money, should you be allowed to invest in your children? Should you be allowed to have your kids have healthcare, access to healthcare? Should you be allowed to spend money on making your kid's life better? Now, hopefully all parents say, yeah, I should be allowed to provide for my kid and make my kid's life better. And like, that's why I go to work. That's why I'm trying to do all these things. I go and I work 70 hours a week so that way I can provide for my family. Well, that's the flip side of that, right? Like what you're saying is, yes, there should be a connection between parents' income and children's income because parents are investing in their children, right? And we want to give parents an incentive to invest in them. Hey, if you invest in your kids, they can have a better life, right? We don't want to just, but of course there's that like tension, right? Like we don't want it to be the case that it's better to be the mediocre kid than a genius in a poor family. We still want the geniuses to rise up. We want the mediocre people to, not be the son of a president or the daughter of a president or married to somebody in the president's family, right? Like we want all those mediocre people to not be involved in this. We want the geniuses, no matter where they come from, to be out there blessing society, right? Inequality is important, but is only one dimension of society. And inequality can increase even when everyone's incomes are increasing. Everybody's life could be getting better, and inequality could be getting higher, and we could still have a better world. Okay? That's a whole nother philosophical discussion. There's also like this really weird thing with inequality. Let me bring this up so you can see everything. Here is how rich a country is across the x-axis. This is a measure of inequality. We haven't talked about this one, but this measure of inequality puts the United States right there in the middle. Let's see if I can. It's right here in the middle, and it's right next to Saudi Arabia. Okay. Apparently, we have the same level of inequality as Saudi Arabia. How many people really want to live in Saudi Arabia right now? I'm guessing not many women want to live in Saudi Arabia. These inequality data, they can be tough to compare. Okay. Last couple minutes, let's talk about what's contributed to recent trends in inequality. You know what's really nice when I say last couple minutes? I don't have everybody like packing up their backpacks, getting ready to move out. I have found an advantage to teaching online. This is great. I mean, of course, like people are dropping out on the side. That's a whole nother thing. But I don't have everybody shuffling like, oh, it's time to zip up my bags because, professor's got to stop talking pretty soon. This is great. I could just keep talking. You guys and never know the difference. There is a benefit. Okay. We're going to look at the causes of increasing inequality. Yes, there's a data set that says post-tax income has not, or post-tax income inequality has not changed over time. Pre-tax has for sure. So there is some argument for income inequality increasing the last 40 years. Okay, we talk a lot about the increase. We don't talk as much about the causes, at least not like a model of what the causes is. There's a whole host of issues here, but I want to talk about some of the interesting contributors. I'm not going to be able to go through and tell you exactly how all of these work through, what percent of it goes to each one, but they're good models and theories, and hopefully they get you looking at the world, asking yourself, which one of these is it? Okay. One of the big things is where you grow up. So the neighborhood you live in, man, I have to show this because the Opportunity Atlas is just so crazy. Let me switch to this view so you can actually see it. Oh, you can see. I just need to turn off my video. Where's my? There it is. Okay, here's the Opportunity Atlas. You can look throughout this. So let's start off where my kids were born. They were born over here in New Haven, Connecticut. So the red, if you're born in a red area, you're likely to grow up and be poor. Whereas if you're born in a blue area, you're likely to grow up and be much better off. Okay, and so we can see here, this is a pretty small neighborhood. Okay, this whole area right here, we lived over here. So our kids likely to grow up and do fine. But if they had just been born, actually, how close are we to this? Oh shoot, we are right here. They're in the poor area. No good. My kids are doomed. Just a little bit over, you're gonna see that you could be much poorer. But in the center of poverty, you have this little oasis of people who grow up to be rich. Does anyone want to guess where in this map Yale University is located? Probably not too hard to find out, okay? Let's go and look in Cache Valley. Okay, so overall in Utah, no matter where you're born, you're doing pretty well. That's not the case. Like if you look in the South, if you grow up, you're probably not going to do that well. But let's go look in Cache Valley itself, okay? Most places in Cache Valley, you're going to end up doing pretty well, but there are places where you could do worse. Let's go down to Salt Lake City. Oh, Ogden. Yikes, big red spot in Ogden, okay? Right next to a big blue spot, right? Like you have this stark divide of if you're born here, you're likely to grow up poor, and if you're born here, you're likely to grow up rich, okay? Where you were born has a big effect on where you end, like what your long run outcomes are. That's because you have different access to schools, you have different access to other resources. So this is really important, okay? Why do they? So you have low income families live near other low income families. You have like segregation. So let me show you this map, which maps on pretty nicely. Again, let me turn off this video. So this is a map of racial segregation. Like it's just each blue dot is a white person, each green dot is a black person, red is Asian, orange is Hispanic. Okay, so obviously you have a big black concentration down here in the South. Again, let's get to where my kids were born in New Haven. What you're seeing right here. Okay, you're seeing like you're having all these white areas. Remember that these were the areas it was better for you to be born. You have this really segregated part, right? Remember that right here was red. It was bad to be born in these areas. Well, a lot of black families live in these areas. They're poor families. So this correlation is more like you're having this residential segregation where you're not forcing people, but like people just end up living around poor people, right? These red dots right here in the middle, again, like these are Asian. Guess where Yale is, right? You have this segregation where over in this area you have a lot of Hispanics. So you have blacks over on this side of the city, Hispanics over on this side of the city, and then you kind of have a mix down here, right? You're seeing big segregation even today, right? This is just a few years old. Let's go to Logan. Oh, it's going to be hard to find Logan when you zoom in from here. Let's see. Nope, I want the overlays. Shoot, it is so hard to zoom in and see where we are. Why Why would they do it like that? Add map labels. Ah, there we go. Okay. Why did they do that? Okay. As we get into Cache Valley, you can see, obviously mainly white. You're seeing a little bit of Asian over here near the university again, and then you're having some Hispanic pockets over here, right? But you don't see much mixing. Segregation is still a serious problem today, and that goes and affects the outcomes of kids when they grow up. They don't have access to people. Oh, shoot. Oh, I was blocking it with that PowerPoint. Bummer. Um, Sorry, I really apologize that I didn't see that with the PowerPoint. Let me just go ahead and redo some of that so that way you can see. Should I redo? I don't even know if it's worth it at this point. The links are in the PowerPoint. They're really fun to explore. Man, really apologize. It's hard for me to see what's casting at that point. Big effect on average of what's going on with where you grow up. By the way, here's the person who created this opportunity atlas. He said, "What's the best place to grow up?" He said, "Salt Lake City, Utah." So that was the best place in the whole country. You had best opportunity if you grew up there. Okay. Skill bias technological change. This is the idea that technology has advanced such that better educated workers or people who have skills they're better able to adapt or tweak whatever they have to the new methods. Okay, so this could be a good explanation given that the rise starts during the 1970s and continues through today. So the benefit of going to college was decreasing going to the 1980s, but since the 1980s, the benefit has been increasing because, hey, we have word process, like we start using more computers in our work, and because I have an education, it's easier for me to use computers. I understand how to use computers. Then as computers change and update, because I have that education, I can more easily adjust that. Whereas like somebody without an education who's working in this rural place, this is one of the themes of like several Hallmark movies, right? The farmer, the old aw shucks dad who's just like, I don't get this newfangled technology, and the young daughter who's come from the city looking for that hunky cowboy guy. She's trying to show her dad how to use this new technology, and it's so hard for him to understand, and she learns, by golly, it's better to just use the old stuff anyway. Anyway, kind of what's going on with skill bias technological change. When you have an education, you can better use the technology that are getting in there, and you're less likely to be replaced by technologies. So here's a table. I'm not going to go too much detail on it, but a table that shows like the jobs that are more likely to be replaced by computers and the ones that are more likely to be benefited by computers. And it's the jobs where you have an education where your job could actually be better because of what's going on with changes in technology. Another one is called assortative mating. This is the sexy economist way of saying who you get married to. Rich people marry rich people, poor people marry poor people. Like in the past, it was kind of like you just married your high school sweetheart kind of thing, or you just kind of married like there was a little more mixing in who got married. Today, like when you go, like a lot of you are likely to meet your spouse at Utah State, right? So you're likely to meet somebody at the same educational level as you. It's not like you're going to marry somebody if you have a college education, or imagine you go and get a PhD. You're less likely to marry somebody with just a high school education. And so you're going to have this fact that people get married more often to people with the same type of experience or education as them. And this can create a problem whether you believe in nature versus nurture. Okay, so if it's nurture, what you're saying is your outcomes are determined by your environment, and that environment, if you have two parents who are college graduates, like they are going to be better able to handle raising children in this world. Maybe not 100%, but they're going to at least be aware of what's going on. They might be able to give them access to opportunity, as opposed to two parents who are high school dropouts who aren't really connected to what's going on in the world, right? Like, so you're going to have a different access to resources in those two families. And then if it's nature, let's suppose that you think that the only thing that determines the education you get is your genes. If you have the certain genes that say you're smart and you go and get a college education, and then you say, okay, all the people who get married to each other in college, like people are getting married in college. So that means they have the genetics that give them college education level skills. they get married, and the people who don't go to college get married, and so they're the ones that don't have the genetics to bring people to college. So then you can get like a genetic divergence there. So it doesn't matter if you think it's genetic or environmental. Like this assortative mating problem could cause, like, it's going to exacerbate inequality. But at the same time, it's so hard to solve this. What do you say? Like, oh, you're not allowed to marry somebody from college? Like, you have to marry somebody. If you graduate with a bachelor's degree, you have to marry somebody that dropped out of high school. That's how we're going to even everything out. That sounds like a really good premise for a dystopian novel, actually. Okay, last one, superstar effect. This is somewhat related to skill bias technological change. Basic idea is that technological change amplifies small difference in skills and increases the reach of the top individuals, giving them really high incomes. This lecture, by the way, a year and a half ago, is what inspired me to start this YouTube channel, where I was like, oh, like I should make sure that I have access to a larger audience where I can teach more people. So I'm gonna start this YouTube channel. Think about TikTok stars. Think about Charlie D'Amelio, right? Like she has a video where she holds a pair of a couple pairs of socks and she drops them. That thing has 31 million views. She is just like 0.01% better at TikTok than the rest of the world. And because she's just a little bit better at TikTok, she gets millions and millions of dollars as a result, right? Like that's what I think the superstar effect has a big explanatory power towards income inequality, because you have people who are just a little bit better suddenly get access to so much bigger audience. And you can see that with the box office, right? Like as I said, box office inequality has been increasing over time. Same with pattern, at least, as trends of income inequality. And I think that that's a superstar effect outcome. So what should we do about it? That's what this last minute's going to be. It's hard to say. We have to have the right model. We have to know like how much of it is superstar effect, how much is it assortative mating, how much is it skill bias technological change. We have to have the right model. We have to know what's actually causing this. But let's think about it. Supposedly, there was more inequality. There was less inequality in the 1950s. But how many people would honestly give up today to go back to the 1950s? Certainly, no women, no blacks. You wouldn't get, no one who wants to be healthy, right? Because we don't have access to that healthcare, right? Like, nobody really wants to go back to the 1950s, even though there was technically lower inequality. So what we should be concerned about is making sure that opportunity is open to everyone. That these world-altering ideas that can come from anywhere, we call them hidden Einsteins a lot of times, hidden Marie Curies, they can come from anywhere, and we want to make sure that no matter where they come up, we want to find them, and we want to cultivate them, and we want them to have that opportunity to change the world. The good news is global inequality has increased a lot. I talked a little bit about that last lecture with China. We've seen this big decrease in poverty. We've seen this big increase in literacy, huge decrease in child mortality. These are important things. These are great things. Thursday, we're going to talk about the Great Recession, 2008. It is going to have a lot in common with what we talked about the Great Depression, Panic in 1907. You're going to see a lot of patterns that are super familiar. It's going to be a good one. It's also our last substantive lecture. I'll give some thoughts a week from today. But we are at the end of the semester. Questions on the test. I don't know how I'm going to make the test available right now. It's just so hard with this online stuff, right? Like normally we'd have, this is the day that you'd be taking your final. I wouldn't have to worry about conflicts you have with other finals. I'll figure out how that's going to work out. How did people do on this last test? Results end up, big announcement. We hit 70% on student ratings. So yes, I will reweight the exams. We'll give you your best exam will be worth 25%. And your worst exam will only be worth 15%, okay? Great. This is important stuff. If you have other questions, please let me know. I have been getting questions from you. I'm sure I haven't answered some of them. But, wow, I cannot believe the semester's already ending. Such a sad time, especially in what's going on. Thank you so much for watching today. and I'll see you on Thursday.